graphic design. He went through the architecture program, undergrad, and then he went on for a master's in graphic design. Taught in the graphic design program and still does in the area we're talking about today. And he has a firm called
Extra Small Design.
Extra Small Design. So he and his wife do that, and they have worked around the country, some of it with Google, and you can tell us more.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, I'm Kyle. I've been brought on to help craft and design and build the website for this project that's gonna kind of showcase the entire timeline of the lake. And yeah, that's my role and that's my goal here. So I've been brought in today just to talk a little bit about like what we're doing, how we're approaching that, what we need from all of you in terms of content. I've got some preliminary mock-ups. They're just basically like, just to get the idea out there of like, maybe this is what we could do. Like John and Dave haven't even seen these yet. They're just totally, hey, like, this is what a timeline could look like. But really a lot of it's gonna depend on like the content that you're able to find and the story that like we wanna tell. So John has the beginning of a timeline set up, and what we've done is, I think you should all have access to the Google Drive now that Dave set up, is that correct? Did everybody get a link to the Honor 394 folder? Okay.
Nick was the last one. Did you see it come through?
Yeah, go on through.
Okay, so we just made a Google Doc in there called Timeline, and it's broken down by era, and John has a lot of pieces to that timeline already in another file. He's gonna move those over, but then as you're doing research and you're finding imagery and collecting data, we're gonna add it to that Google Drive, Google Doc file. It's separated. Dave just had me label all the eras, so like you'll have like your time spans in there and what the general categories are for those eras. My goal is to collect all of the information that's going into the website into that visual timeline in that one place. So we all have access to it and nobody's like duplicating efforts. And then when it comes time for us to design this timeline, we have all that content in one place. Because the types of content that you find are gonna change what the timeline looks like. Like if you find all kinds of amazing historical photos, but they're tiny, we'll have to take a certain approach to like how do we showcase those, versus if we have like amazing aerial photos like Dave has, like 64 megabyte aerials that we can like zoom into. That'll be like a cool feature of the website where you'll be able to actually like zoom into larger photos and like see more detail. So it really just comes down to like, what is all that content that we find and how do we let people explore it, navigate it, and understand the history of the lake. So yeah, everybody has access to that file. If you look at that file, currently it's broken down by era, and then I've got a little block example in the top there of like what we're looking for. So we want as exact of a date as you can get for your event that would end up on the timeline, a title for that event, whatever the information is, because same thing, like this is up to you, like you're doing the research, I'm not sure what's gonna end up on this timeline. If it's just the name of an event, fine. It could have more information, and that might change the way we design the timeline. Right now, we've got some pretty basic stuff, but like, if you have sections that you're interested in, that you found a lot of information about, just because it's one entry on the timeline, we can still design that so like people can actually click on that event and actually like expand it and read more about it and have other information. It's not just like one event on the timeline gets one image. We can do all kinds of really cool stuff, but we just have to see what we have first. So that block is in there, and then Dave and I just added like an example one down towards the bottom in era 5 for Grady Gamage's talk. Just like you populate it with as much information as you have. Like the rule of thumb is the more content that we have, the better for this, because that just gives us different opportunities to like showcase the information differently. So whatever you have, drop it in there. We'll kind of keep track of it.
You can always edit down.
Yeah.
It's really hard to edit up.
Yeah, it's always easier to like cut content than it is to like scrape to try to find new content or more information. Okay, so just to kind of like show you some possibilities, some ideas, some things that we're thinking about right now. We've got all kinds of things. So this would be one option where even like the core focus of the timeline, I think is a little bit up for interpretation. Like we want the visual timeline to be as thorough as possible. But within that, we could have special areas. Like we could have an area just on development, an area just on politics, the economics of things. Did I just get rid of it? The idea is that the website would be primarily the timeline, but it's also going to have information about the project. You'll all be credited for your work. If there's a 50th anniversary celebration, that would be featured on the website. So it'll be more than just the timeline. There'll be other pieces to the site as we kind of flesh it all out. So this was just like one possibility. What does the website look like? This is just looking at, oh, and you can't even see the whole thing because the resolution of this is low. Let me see if I can make this a little bit smaller. Yeah, so the idea that like the timeline could be very visual. People would be able to scroll through, navigate, they could jump around by years in the timeline on the right. If there's a lot of historical photos, like we might do things like this where it's kind of in a grid. If we have videos, we can do like big full bleed video stuff if it's in high resolution. There's all kinds of different possibilities. So this was just like one kind of initial concept. We looked at what happens as you scroll down the page. So something like this, where our navigation looks really nice and it's like overlaid over a photo. What happens as you scroll? And the photo goes away, you can't have white type on a white background. So what happens, sometimes what we'll do is like, we'll drop down a new header that stays like fixed to the page, so as you scroll the timeline, you can still jump around and do different things. And this is just kind of a different look at like what the timeline, what the opening to the timeline could be, the header of the site versus like the grid itself is still pretty much the same. And we've also looked at things like, if we have big images, like it all depends on how much content we have for each section of the timeline. Like if there's enough content, we might be able to like nicely break that timeline down by decades, or maybe like at the very beginning of that timeline in era 1, it's a little bit looser. And then as we drill down into areas that we have more information about, we can do like really nice breaks within the timeline that could be like fluid video they're playing to like introduce a new decade. There's all kinds of possibilities. So these are just like some of the things that we've been playing around with, just to give you an idea of like all the stuff that you're working on, hopefully will be collected in a very nice way and displayed in a really cool kind of interactive way where people can really like, we can do zoomable images, we can do slideshows, just some nice stuff that kind of conveys the full history and all of the work that went into making the like what it is today. So yeah, that's that. I think specifics, there's stuff that you should know in terms of like finding content. On the web, the higher resolution you can find it, the better. Like you may have heard stuff on the web, stuff on the screen doesn't need to be high res, like it can be lower res, and that is kind of true. Except all of your new like laptops and phones have what we call retina displays, which are like super high resolution, so we actually need images as big as you can possibly get them. So if an image is like this laptop, this 15-inch MacBook, the width of it in pixels is technically 2,800 pixels wide. So if we wanted super crisp, super high-res photos, we'd actually need them to be 2,800 pixels wide. I deal with like cropping multiple different versions and doing all kinds of stuff. But the key for you is to find stuff that's as high-res as possible. Videos that are like 1080p would be a high-definition video file. 720p and 1080p are like all current. If you find videos that are interviews from the past, like they might be lower resolution, and we can still have those on the website, but we're just gonna have to deal with them a little bit differently. Like we won't be able to take an old video and feature it like full width on the website. It'll look pretty grainy and bad. Yeah.
For those of us who are technologically challenged, what's a range of a good image for the resolution that you want? Like what's a good marker to look for? Like I don't know.
So no, it's a good question. Like we can work with anything. It just limits like how big that image can be displayed.
Do you just
So-
have like, just for reference, so I can be like, oh, this is better than this one is?
If you want an image that's full width, like it needs to be at least 1800 pixels wide. If you were like, this image would look beautiful as like a full background on a website, it needs to be at least 16 to 1800 pixels wide. Anything lower than that, we can still absolutely feature, but it's just gonna be smaller. Like, in a layout like this website's, 1600 pixels wide, like maybe those images are 400 pixels wide. So if you find a smaller image that's 400 pixels, we can still feature it, but no one will ever be able to see it any larger than that. Like, you can't zoom into it, you can't do anything fun.
What do you get out of a camera, iPhone camera?
It depends on your iPhone, like they range from 8 megapixels to 12 megapixels, so we can use it. Like if you can shoot it with your camera phone, we can use it. Like that'll probably be at least 1600 pixels wide, and it'll look pretty good. Like we can touch it up and do things in terms of image correction, but resolution wise, like the dimensions of those photos, your camera phone's totally fine.
There's a lot of old photographs like those, particularly out of that McLaughlin collection that's now online from the library. They were all taken with a large format camera, and when they scanned them, they got a lot of resolution in them.
Yeah, so, and we'll be able to use that stuff, like if it was scanned in high resolution and those images are 1800 pixels wide or larger, like we'll be able to do nice bulky stuff. Like the aerial that Dave has to show you things like 64 megabytes as one photo, so that means it's huge. Like the overall dimensions of it, like we'll be able to zoom way into that as if it was a Google map, which will be pretty nice. So the bigger the better. I can deal with downsizing anything, so the larger images you find, the better. You're going to, anything that you find from like the ASU library, things like that, we also want to track all of the attribution on any of those images. So like, if you do a Google search, you'll find like a ton of stuff that's on like Shutterstock and things like that. Like we can't really use that unless somebody's gonna buy it. But anything that's in the ASU library, we probably can use, but we'll need to credit the original photographer or author or whoever was in the video. So in that Google Drive, in the Google Doc, there is a line for credit and attribution for that content. Because what we'll do is something like this, we might have like a small like eye or like a small little icon in the corner of photos, like when you mouse over them, that if you click on it, it might actually give you the attribution, and then like we'll have a page that's just dedicated to the credits of all the content that's on the site. So yeah, stuff like that.
I have a story about that attribution related to this course. The course was advertised on the Barrett webpage, and they used a photo of the Tempe Town Lake that this guy had taken. I get an email from him, he said, hey, you're using my photo and there's no credit there. So the college put this photo in there. He showed me his website and it was in his website. He had some beautiful work.
Yeah.
But that's the thing we have to watch is if we can get a photograph that, you know, if it comes from the ASU archives, you give them credit. But let's say you're just using a URL somehow, not the photo, but you link to a URL.
If you link to a public URL, like, you're okay, but if we're using an image that's from a public URL, you have to assume that that image is copyrighted as part of that website, so you should actually request to use the image, unless the image itself like has copyright information. Like there's Creative Commons licensing, so you'll see like the CC on things, and if you, usually those icons link off to like the Creative Commons page, because there's different levels of Creative Commons attribution. Like you can use this and modify it, you can use this but you can't modify it, you can use this but you have to give me credit, or you can use this and like you need to credit me but it doesn't need to be like public facing. Like there's weird stuff like that, and whenever you post content, like even if you post images on Flickr, things like that, those levels of Creative Commons licensing are usually kind of built into things. So on just some random person's website, that information might be hard to find. and you might actually have to like contact the person and track them down to see if you can use that image. But if you're on like a larger site like Flickr, you can usually just click a license and see that information. Same thing if you were like using Google image search to do some of that stuff. There's actually a filter in image search that allows you to search by images that are labeled for reuse or reuse with modification. So it would only return results that you are legally allowed to use. So there are things like that.
Okay, here's another one. Oral history, Grady Gamage. He did this class for us. We post his video. He said, hey, I didn't give you a release on that, right? So we really ought to be getting releases from the people that we record.
Yeah, probably.
Yes, good catch.
We do it for these people we interview for the Retirees Association. We've done 115 of them. And we do get them to sign a release. that we can
Before we
use.
turn the camera on.
Yeah,
I haven't signed anything, burn this footage.
but then it's copyrighted by the Board of Regents.
Sure. So you need to give credit back to the Board of Regents.
So I'm not sure whether we'll use that on this or not. I probably will be an ASU document when we get done.
In case of Grady Gamage, before